Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another fun study session. This week we are going to focus on a few regions that we probably don't pay a ton of attention to, whether it be on our wine lists or in our retail settings. Eastern Europe, the Eastern Mediterranean, and a region I like to refer to as the Cradle of Winemaking. So we're going to fly over quite a few countries in doing so. There's probably a 20 to 30 minute presentation in total today. There's not a ton of depth of information on a lot of these countries. Some of them, it's just sort of basic geography. But I think it's always important, as we've seen in the past, to do quite a bit of map work and to just kind of get a feel for where places are. When I study, I can read about a region quite a bit, but until I see it on the map and I compare it to where other things are, I don't really have the understanding as much as I do afterwards. So just start with Eastern Europe. You can see here we've covered some things in the past in Germany, Austria, Italy, of course, those being key wine growing regions of the world. Today we're going to take a look at the Czech Republic, at Slovakia, Slovenia, Croatia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova, and Ukraine, as well as just a flyover really of Russia when it comes to the winemaking regions and where they are. So, as I mentioned, I didn't put in Ukraine and Russia. Those would be the eighth slide sort of together. We start in the Czech Republic, though, where there are two principal regions. And you can see here Bohemia and Moravia to the south. And then if we take a little bit of a closer look down here, you can see the majority of quality wine growing in Czech Republic is in the Moravia wine region. And important to note, I would say probably the most important DOC there is Synodmo. Again, I'm going to apologize immediately for my pronunciations because they're probably not going to be spot on. But Moravia covers about 96% of the production of wine. There is a sort of a predicate system. It's based off of the German predicate system called quality wines with special attributes. Here you'll find the NM scale, which equates its degrees to the number of kilograms of natural sugar in 100 liters of grape juice. The VOC system is a voluntary organization based loosely on the Austrian DAC model, taking again from another neighbor. We mentioned Synodmo. This debuted in 2009. Requires hand harvesting, defined alcohol contents. There's no oak usage. There is significant lees aging, must be a cork enclosure, and it has to be produced from one of the three following grapes: Grüner Veltliner, Riesling, or Sauvignon Blanc. You'll see other VOCs too: Palava, Blatnis, Mikulov, and Modra Hori. But I think probably most importantly, for study purposes, Synodmo would be the one you want to pay attention to. I personally haven't had any wines from the Czech Republic. It'd be really interesting to hear from any of you all that have had them. Slovakia, as we move further, you can see the Czech Republic is here and Austria to the west. And then just south will be Hungary that we'll spend quite a bit of time on. I think it's important to note too that Slovakia also has Tokaj. This is sort of in the way that Alsace bleeds over into the Pfalz. Tokaj sort of bleeds over into Slovakia here as well. Hungary has quite a bit of winemaking tradition. Obviously, we know it for Tokaj up here in the northeastern corner and the Carpathian Mountains that sort of bridge right through here. Tokaj, of course, sits on the confluence of the Bodrog and Tisza rivers. You can see the Tisza kind of flows through all of Hungary here, through the south, through the regions, the Duna in the south. And then there's some other important ones to take a look at. I mean, you have Lake Balaton too, which I think is exceedingly important in Bodocsany. You'll want to know Zexard in the south in the Pannonian region. You'll want to know Sopron in the North Transdanubian region. This is right on the border of Austria and produces quite a bit of similar wines to what you see there. And then Eger, which is famous for that Egri Bicarbor too. I wanted to note too, the Carpathian Mountains sort of cut through most of Ukraine and Romania, and you can see how their shadow would have an effect on Hungary and Slovakia. So we mentioned, of course, the Bodrog and the Tisza and the Carpathian Mountains with Hungary, providing really a continental climate here. Typically, you see a lot of volcanic loess and clay. There are in Tokaj 74 first growths. There are 2 great first growths, Zsarvas and Mezsmai. Ferment is key to the production of Tokaj, with harsh Levallois playing a bit part. You can also find Sargo Muscatelli and a few other grapes too. Really, Prince Rákóczi delimited the area in 1700. He started to see legal recognition come online as early as 1772. So a rich history of wine laws in Hungary. Here, Azu grapes are critical. They're grapes of a higher sugar level that are affected by Botrytis cinerea. Likely, these botrytized wines predated German Trockenbeeren Auslese and the famous wines of Sauternes. They're handpicked. They're gathered in what we call putney, which is a 25 kilogram basket. The Azu wines minimums are 120 grams per liter and 9% ABV. But you can also get free run juice from them, which is called Essencia. This requires at least 450 grams per liter of residual sugar, and some check in over 800 grams per liter if you look at Royal Tokaj, and barely reach 4 to 6% ABV after really, really long aging, sometimes decades. There is a 1.2% minimum required ABV for Essencia. What they do to get that is the Azu paste is in mixed with non-Azu must prior to fermentation in gunky barrels of 136 liters of a Hungarian oak. Just over 2 years aging is required and 18 months in barrel. You can also get Azu wines and what they call samarodny, as it comes, and these can be aged under a floor-like substance in oak. They can be edish, which is sweet, or zsarvas, which is dry. Forditas or mashlas are from re-fermenting spent Azu paste. And then you're starting to see the Circle of Mad as a small group of winemakers banding together in the region for quality wine production. But Hungary really has a lot more to offer than just Tokaj. And I think we pointed out specifically in Sopron, in Somlo, Bodocsany, Zexard. Villany is quite important for Bordeaux-style varieties in the south, and of course, Eger too. So today there's 22 wine appellations, or 30 PDOs and 5 PGIs. Excuse me, there were 22 appellations out of 2000. Eger is the home to that Egri Bíjkavár, which is known as the bull's blood of Eger. Traditionally, this was Kadarka based. Today, it is Kek Frankos and 3 other grapes. Kek Frankos, of course, is Blaufränkisch, right? If you have Bíjkavár, can also be labeled in Zexard. Here, it's only required that you utilize 3 different grapes, a blend of 3 grapes. We mentioned Villany in the south. This is really the hottest area. It's great for Bordeaux varietals. You're starting to see some international influence there too. We mentioned Bodocsany and the shores of Lake Balaton. Somlo sits on an extinct volcano, and you see that Kek Frankos production in Sopron as it borders Burgenland. Here's Neusiedl-Lürsee with Austria. Pretty beautiful stuff. You could also see sort of the mountainous regions in the Wine Folly pick here. I think between Gildsam and Wine Folly, they always have some of the greatest maps out there and great information too. You could also see through Hungary, not only do you have the Bodrog and the Tisza, but they like to point out that the Danube flows straight through Budapest, right here. Croatia, to the southwest of Hungary, sits really on the Adriatic Sea. A lot of it is coastal, and I think you can really divide it into 2 major regions that are divided by the Dinaric Alps that cut through here. That would be continental Croatia with 9 PDO zones, and then coastal Croatia with 2 really critical ones, and 4 subregions to 1. Dalmatia is probably the most important here on southern or south of Istria, broken into northern, central, and southern hinterland, and then the Dimnak PDO, which is quite important because this is where you have Mike Grkic from Grkic Hills, his Croatian project called Grkic Vina. Istria in the north is here. Typically in Croatia, you see acacia barrels instead of oak barrels. For grapes, Grasovina makes up about 50% of the white acreage. And then, of course, important to note, Kryleniak Kastelanski, which is an offshoot of Zinfandel. and Plavik Mali that dominate red production. We'll take a little bit of a closer look. It's a little bit of a grainy map, and I apologize for that, but it's about as good as I could find, to be honest with you. But you can see Istria here to the north and Dalmatia on the south. Cool. Some further terminology for Croatia. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce most of these, but you can see premium quality wine, table wine, Suho for dry, Polju Suho for off dry, Slatko for sweet, Jello for white, Pernod for black, and then Prosek dessert wines from dried grapes. Slovenia, as it sits just east of Friuli in Italy, here has three major regions, Primorska, Posavska, and Podravska. The subregions of Primorska are probably the most important, and Gorska Brda, I think, is one that you want to make sure that you're aware of. Of course, famous for Movia and Edi Simčić. There's three others that follow it too. Grapes here, you'll find Zelen and Pinella and Vipava, which is here, the purplish kind of pinkish area. Tiran and Cross, Refosk, Rebula, Civi Pinot, and Primorska. These are just changed names from Refosco, Rebola Gialla. Their international varieties are starting to take hold though, and you find a very mild Mediterranean climate here in Primorska. Romania is an interesting case. You can see it's just southeast of Hungary, north of Bulgaria, and west of the Republic of Moldova, broken down into a handful of different regions here. And the cool thing is that they're sort of broken out by white, red, and then white or red. So you can see perhaps the most important and famous of Romania would be Cotnari here in the northeast, and that's for lusciously sweet wines made from the Grassa di Cotnari grape variety. Tarnave is also sort of important too, and we'll want to point that one out. And then Dideliu Maru, or Mare, right there here. Until really the fall of communism, this was rolled by cooperatives. It used to be ranked as Eastern Europe's top producer until 2009. Today, you're starting to see some more international varieties taking hold. You'll see Fetiasca Alba and Fetiasca Regala as sort of the top native indigenous white varieties. Fetiasca Niagara, Burgund Mare, and Bebiesca Niagara for indigenous reds. Again, you have a continental climate. It's fairly landlocked, as you can see, with a little bit the Black Sea affecting the Dobrosia region here. Again, the Carpathian Mountains kind of split the country, and so it's pretty rocky and high elevation. The southern border of Bulgaria is the Danube River. We mentioned Tarnave here for really high quality whites. Of course, Grassa di Cotnari and Moldova region. Diallo Mare down here for high quality reds. And then there's another one called Murfitlar. I'll get in close. You can see it right here in the Dobrosia region. That's really affected by the coastal Black Sea region. A couple of wine laws for Romania. You'll see VM for table wines, superior table wines, or VMS. Quality wines with a geographic designation, which are produced from authorized grapes in one of those 7 regions you saw previously, are VS. And then you have DOC, which are the PDO. So DOC, CMD are harvested at full maturity. CT are late harvested, and then CIV are botrytis affected. So you see a lot of sweet wines in these areas. I wanted to point out Moldova too, as it sits just east of Romania. This is the home to the Molesti Mici, which is called the Golden Collection in Cricova. It's the largest wine cellar in the world, with somewhere around 2 million total bottles. You're starting to see a new wave of pioneering production from Chateau Vartelli. You have the highest per capita wine production in the world here, a lot of black soils over limestone, moderated by the Black Sea, and there's really a mix of indigenous and international varieties. I haven't seen any production from Moldova yet, but it's supposed to be on the map, so keep your eyes peeled. Bulgaria, I think, is one of the more important ones to know. There is a history of great wine being produced here. So PDO here is known as GDO, and Controlaron is their upgraded GDO category. Most noteworthy controller on appellations are Suhindal and Sviktov in the Danubian plain here, and then Sungerlair, in the Rose Valley, Harshevo in the Struma River Valley, and Konkrum in the Black Sea region over here. There's 5 major production areas. We just touched on most of them here. Geographically, the northern border is the Danube River. You also have in the Struma River Valley the Zapadny Rhodope Mountain, and then in the Rose Valley, which is just a little purplish area, you have the Stara Planina Mountain, and then of course you have the Black Sea here to the east coast. The grapes here, Cabernet Merlot are king, but you do get Riccatsatelli and Dimiad as the leading whites as well. So I would say, pay attention to the Rose Valley, the Black Sea River, the Struma River Valley, and remember these handful of control run areas. A couple of labeling terms for Bulgaria. If your fermentation occurs in oak casks of 500 liters or smaller, you can call it Barrique. Reserve is 1 year of aging. Special selection is 2 years of aging. You'll also find Gamza, which is Kadarka. You'll find Mavrud, you'll find Melnik too. And you're starting to see a lot more New World style of both winemaking and marketing in Bulgaria. I just wanted to throw these in here. These are about the most basic maps that I can find of Ukraine and Russian wine growing regions. Probably the most important to know would be Crimea for the Ukraine, although this goes back and forth as to who controls it. But they do produce sparkling wine as well as some lusciously sweet wines. And then for Russia in the south, you could see sort of between 3 seas, Caspian, the Black Sea, and the Azov Sea. Really, Krasnodar, I think, is the most important region there that I've read about. As we move away from Eastern Europe, I want to take a look at the Eastern Mediterranean. So, we've taken a look at Bulgaria down through Greece in past presentations. Now we're going to take a look at Turkey, and probably most importantly, the Sea of Marmara up here. It also sits on the Black Sea. You can imagine be a fun area to grow some grapes there. We'll take a look at Cyprus and the Levantine Sea here, this high elevation volcano basically. Of course, I think you're all familiar with Lebanon as being a great wine producing country, and then Israel as well. So we'll take a look at all of those before we get into the Cradle of Winemaking. Well, we start with Cyprus. We mentioned mountainous, high elevation. Your best vineyards here sit between 2,000 and 5,000 feet above sea level. Known for the Troodos Mountains and their super volcanic soils. Being the island that it is, has not seen phylloxera. And as we saw with some of the other regions here, there is a lusciously sweet wine known as Commanderia, made from raisined Mavro or Zinisteri dried grapes. It's got to be aged 2 years. The vines have to be 4 years old. There's no irrigation allowed. It has to sit between 500 and 900 meters above sea level. And occasionally, it can outweigh port sugar by up to 4 times. Typically, your larger corporations are producing non-vintage Mavro, whereas your smaller, more boutique vintage Zinisteri is also being produced by small producers. You can see, too, if we take a quick zoom in, this is your Commanderia area in Limesos. Important to note. Turkey in the northwest. We mentioned this sort of area right around Istanbul for the Marmara Sea and the Black Sea, and probably Marmara being the best growing region for all of it. Anatolia, though, this area in yellow, is probably the most important as far as production volume is concerned. You've also got the Aegean area and then the Mediterranean down here. The 5th largest grape growing nation in the world, right? So you'd think you'd see a lot more wines from there. But with those grapes, they're producing a lot of raisins, they're producing a lot of table grapes, there's a lot of wine, and there's a lot of Rocky. And I think we should just take a quick aside to talk about Ouzo, Rocky, and Arak. Sort of like saying gin, right? So there's gins that are driven by juniper, there are gins that are driven by citrus. In the case of these, they're all affected by anise seed at some point. I would say that Ouzo is probably the most restricted style and the most affected by anise seed. I think they're all produced out of grape too. but Rocky and Iraq have a tendency, you can find them with more herbs and spices than what you'll find just anise seed too. There's no official wine growing regions delimited for Turkey, so all of these are sort of unofficial areas. They're dominated by indigenous grapes. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce these, but I'm sure they're all delicious and I'd love to try them. As we get to Lebanon, I think we're all probably have at least heard of Chateau Moussar in the Bekaa Valley, but I think it's important to take a look at where it is and some of the other regions that surround it too. This is really the heart of ancient Phoenicia. And I think when we talked about Turkey previously, you've probably read through wine history about the Phoenicians, or you've read about the Ottomans. And at each point, they had some rule over different areas. The Ottoman capital really would have been sort of in Budapest and Istanbul, excuse me. Here you'll find the Phoenician capitals really. The modern history is really traced back to the opening of Chateau Cassara in 1857. They declared their independence in 1943, and then Civil War began in 1975 and lasted through 1990. But really, it was Michael Broadbent who recently passed away, and Serge Ochar also recently passed away from Chateau Moussar, that are really credited with bringing light to the category. Mount Lebanon separates the coast from the interior, and then the Anti-Lebanese mountains act as the border to Syria here on the eastern side and stretch all the way to Mount Hermon in the Golan Heights area of Galilee in Israel. So the Bekaa Valley is this yellow speckled area right here, and it sits between those two mountain ranges on the Litani River, which provides alluvial soils and a lot of times will dry up by summer's end. I would say Batroun is probably the next in terms of quality of the wine growing regions here. For Chateau Moussar, their whites are made from Obadai or Obeda and Merwa. A lot of people thought those were Chardonnay and Semillon for a long time. And those are really the most famous indigenous whites here. They've been organoleptically separated from those two grape varieties and proven to be completely indigenous here. They tend to thrive in the mountainous regions though, and not down in the Bekaa Valley, which is interesting. And then again, we mentioned Iraq, produced by many. It's distilled 2 to 4 times with anise seed added prior to the final distillation, and then aged in cloth-covered amphora. Great producers of Lebanon, so good that I call them producers. Chateau Moussar, Cassara, Domaine de Tourelle, and Chateau Nakad. As we get to the Israeli map, again, this is a little bit grainy, but I think you can kind of at least get a feel for things. You see Galilee in the north, Golan Heights here, the coastal plain, the central mountain, which is important, and the Judean foothills that kind of sit there inside of it. And then you get into Negev, which is sort of the desert. Pretty interesting. And I'm going to label it as Israel and Palestine too, because we have to remember that the Gaza Strip runs through here, and then right through here you'll find really in the heart of Palestine. These regions I think are unofficial too, so you'll find Galilee up here, the upper Galilee, Golan Heights, lower Galilee too. So Golan Heights is exceedingly important. Baron Edmond de Rothschild invests here in the 1880s. The winery still actually operates in Carmel today. Boutique producers of the 20th century include Marguerite and Domaine de Castel. The myth of kosher wines, I think, needs to be talked about here. These can actually be produced anywhere in the world. There's kosher wines made in Bordeaux. It just has to be, once it's harvested, and the grapes and wine may only be handled by a Sabbath observing Jew. So kosher wine is important to Israel for sure, but it can be produced other areas of the world. You'll find that international varieties sort of dominate here: Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Shiraz, Carignan, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Viognier. Though there is an indigenous variety called Argamon, which is a crossing of Carignan and Suzhou, that's starting to show some renewed interest. For a while there, it was intended to be a workhorse in the vineyards, but you're starting to see people produce quality wines from it. The native varieties you'll find here are Marwawi, Dabuki, Jandali, Baladi Asmar, and Batuni. We mentioned Mount Hermon here in the northeast corner for the volcanic soils of Golan Heights. Galilee is named after the Sea of Galilee here. The lower Galilee runs into Mount Tabor. The Judean hills have quite a diversity of soil types, including terra rossa, which is pretty cool. And then the central region too, which is all through here. And again, all of these regions are unofficial. Next, as we begin to look at what I call the cradle of winemaking, you can see we've moved from the Black Sea and Mediterranean Sea, this Eastern Mediterranean area. Now we're going to shift our focus to the area between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And the reason I call this the cradle of winemaking is because either Georgia, Armenia, or Syria, at some point in their history, have all claimed the oldest winemaking either tools or grape residue in history. And it kind of goes back and forth. I mean, somebody has a new discovery. Currently, the Areni 1 cave in Armenia in the Viadzor region is something like 6,000 years old. There's some things in Georgia that might indicate that there's 8,000-year-old wine growing areas. So it's pretty interesting to look at. But we start in Georgia. Here we want to, the Caucasus Mountains separate Georgia from Russia, so a mountainous region. The most important of all the areas, and 80% of the wine growing, comes from this Kakheti region down here. As you get a little bit further south and away from the Black Sea, but I think it's also important to note the Raqqa, the Lechkumi, and the Imereti regions too, known for quality wine growing. You'll see just north of Turkey here and Armenia. Indigenous grapes here are important. Saperavi for red and Ricacitelli for white. You also find Mitzvane and Kisi, plus hundreds of others. These are known as kavevri, these traditional clay amphora. They're typically planted in the ground to age their wines, a little cloth over the top. There's a very big push for quality dry wines coming out of Georgia. You're starting to see a lot more indigenous and international varieties as well. And then we finish really in Armenia. And I wanted to point out just the high continental desert that Armenia is, but it is fairly lush in certain regions too. Mount Ararat is important, and you'll see the Ararat wine region named after that. Mount Ararat's actually in Turkey though, strangely enough. Lake Savan is another mitigating factor that's very important here. Your indigenous varieties include the red Areni, which is probably the most important grape of the area. Kaket, Hatanat, Kanrayut. For white, you'll find Voskahat, Katun Karji, Kangun, Kurdi, and Garan Damak. Grape producers, you've got Zora, Jacobi and Hobbs, and Karas. Again, it's a high elevation desert. It's landlocked. 90% of the country is over 3,000 feet above sea level. So you have a hot continental climate for sure. You've got ancient mineral rich volcanic soils with limestone. And I'll just zoom in here real quick. In the Viadzor region, I believe, right down in here in an area called Abagnadzor is where you'll find the Areni 1 cave. If anybody's looking to travel there, I think that would be super fun. Yerevan is the capital city. You'll see it here close to Ararat, Armavir. But really, your quality wines are coming from Ararat and the Viadzor. That's my story for this week. That is, in a very nutshell, Eastern Europe, the Eastern Mediterranean, and the cradle of winemaking. I hope this presentation at least brought all of the maps and information into one place for you so that you can take a look back at it and review it as you're either preparing yourself for examinations or just to highlight some things for your guests and consumers when they come back to our restaurants, or for those of you that are working in retail that have the time to spend on Sundays with me. I certainly appreciate that. We'll get this uploaded to YouTube, and we'll catch you guys all next week. Cheers.